Hey guys, it's Ice again. Got a review for today on the Benchmade 905 Stryker. This is the vintage version before the axis lock came around. I'm filming outside today, so I apologize for the extra noise. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'll only do the stats very briefly because I feel like it's not super necessary on this knife. The overall length is 7.1 inches. The blade length is 2.9 inches. The blade thickness is 0.1 inches, and notice that spine does get very hefty up near the tip. The steel is 154 cm right there. Now the handle length is 4.1 inches. The handle material is black G10. The liner material, this is a liner lock, and believe it or not, the liner material is actually titanium. It's not 420J. The weight is 2.7 ounces. This is the vintage Stryker. This isn't the newer Axis Stryker. And this is a customer's knife. I just had to do a video on it when it came through. Now, a little bit of history on the knife. The 905 Stryker actually won Knife of the Year of 1998. And something tells me it's got to have something to do with this handle. Because the newer Stryker, the Stryker Axis, has an identical handle to the Benchmade Triage. And the Triage also won Knife of the Year, if I'm not mistaken, more recently. Now I'm going to get into just a bit of a knife discussion for you guys over this, give you some nice close-ups of an awesome old vintage Benchmade. So I'll go over the blade first. This is the standard 905 Tonto blade, and you can see it sort of has Benchmade's standard signature satin. You can see those vertical lines there. The Tonto on this knife is actually very beefy, similar to the Contigo. Up on the spine here, you'll notice it gets very thick before the tip. And the blade itself isn't actually getting any thicker, it's just staying the same thickness at the blade flat all the way up to here. The only reason the spine looks smaller right here is because of that top swedge. So really what that does is it just beefs up the tip, and all of this steel back here that the top swedge is removing isn't super necessary because of how thick the blade is on the flats. So it's removing weight right here, but beefing up the tip so that you can get a lot of jabbing power. And it's really a wonderful design. It's a great tactical design. It's a great EDC design. The guy who owns this knife just uses it as a standard EDC, sort of a beater knife, and it's great for that as well. Now I'm going to direct your attention to the secondary bevel on this knife. It's a very, very short bevel, you'll notice, and it's a little bit asymmetrical. So on this side, the bevel is not as long as it is on this side right here. So the bevel right there is longer than it is right there. So there is sort of standard, what I've seen in a whole lot of Benchmades, there is a small degree of edge asymmetry. It's really not a big deal. It takes a whole lot of edge asymmetry to affect the blade's performance. It's far more about the sharpness and the type of grind that you're using. Now this does have Benchmade sort of standard serrations, you'll notice, and just to give a comparison with some of Benchmade's newer serrations, here is the almost brand new Benchmade Triage. So you can see sort of how the serrations have evolved over the years in Benchmade. This one being from 1998, this one being from 2011. So they have evolved a little bit. They've gotten just larger swoops, bigger teeth. So this is a 4-3 serration arrangement, and this is a 5-4. So they've just crammed more serrations into the same amount of space on the older one. Now what that does is, when you've got more serrations in the same amount of space, that basically just makes a finer cut. So larger teeth, larger swoops are going to act more aggressively on the material. Smaller teeth and smaller recurves are going to cut more finely. So it's still going to be, honestly, I think I prefer this type of serration a little bit better, because while the larger serration may be a little bit easier to sharpen, serrations in general usually aren't sharpened. It takes a whole lot to correctly resharpen serrations. So that being considered, you might as well just go with the serrations that give you a finer cut, because serrations are already aggressive in nature. You don't really need them to be more aggressive. And I've noticed with the larger serrations, sometimes it does become a little bit much. And you can sort of tell with how serrations affect the flesh as well. I think you'll notice I recently cut the crap out of my thumb, and that was with the triage. And I think this is sort of worth showing you guys, just the difference that serrations make. I cut my finger right here, and I cut my thumb right here. The blade hit at the same time, one on the fine edge, one on the serrations with the same force, but the fine edge, they both went in equally as deep, but the fine edge healed much quicker. You can see on the finger there, it healed much quicker, it left a smaller scar, it sealed up easily. They both bled a whole lot, but the one that got cut with the serrations, you'll notice, this was a month ago now, it still hasn't fully sealed up. So serrations by nature are very aggressive. They leave a very aggressive cut, and so you really don't need to make serrations that much more aggressive than they are. So I just thought that was sort of interesting to show you guys. I found that you really do learn a lot about a certain grind or edge style's cutting performance when you actually cut yourself with it. You can feel in the flesh how the blade interacts with the material when you are the material. And I know it sounds kind of morbid, but some of my biggest insights into cutting performance have been when I cut myself very deeply. So yeah, I just thought that was worth showing you guys. Another thing I wanted to go over with this blade was sort of where the weight of it lies. And I feel like the top swedge sort of helps with it, but if you just look at in plan view of the blade shape, it is incredibly weight centralized, so it's a very nimble knife. You're really not going to get a whole lot of forward motion with this knife, especially considering its very short blade length of only 2.9 inches. But keeping this top swedge up here sort of does help to balance out the rest of the blade, rather than keeping all of the weight right around the pivot. The other thing I wanted to go over with this blade is the opening device. Normally Benchmades and just about all of their knives will use a thumb stud rather than a thumb disc, which is what this uses. I definitely prefer a thumb stud just because it's very quick, and you can build up a lot of pressure before flicking it open, whereas with a thumb disc, since it's rounded, you really can't get as much pressure on it. Now that may just be because of how stiff the hinge is, but for example, in comparison, you can see how much faster that thumb stud is. That's also a Benchmade. This is a Benchmade as well, it has a thumb stud. They're both just much faster than any thumb disked knife I have seen. So I definitely don't like thumb discs. I think it's just sort of, I don't really know why they included it on this knife. Possibly that it might have potential for like the wave feature from Emerson. I don't know. Now I want you to take a look at this part of the blade right here, down there. It's sort of a sharpening choil, but I want you to notice just how far extended it is. I don't know why they did that. It really cuts down on the amount of edge real estate you have. You'll notice that the plunge line is probably a solid centimeter behind where the edge starts, which is sort of bizarre in my mind. To give you guys some perspective in comparison, normally the plunge line is very close to where the edge starts. And you see this on a lot of Benchmade's knives. The plunge line is very close to where the edge starts. But for some reason, on this knife, they extended the beginning of the edge a solid centimeter past the plunge line. I don't know why they did this. It really irks me when companies do this, because, you know, with all of the weight that you're carrying in your pocket, you want to get as much out of it as you can. So if you've got a 3-inch blade, but only 2 inches of it is sharpened, you're sort of getting ripped off. You're carrying around the steel of a 3-inch blade, but you're only getting the functionality of a 2-inch blade. It just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't add up. I don't know why they would do that. Also, keeping the edge much closer to where your finger is helps with control. Now, some could argue that this is just supposed to be a choil, but that's an extremely uncomfortable choil, and especially on the fine edge version, it would be possible to cut yourself on that. So I don't know why they wouldn't just extend this down. If you're going to make a choil, go big or go home. Make it, you know, like what Spyderco does. They have a giant choil right here, right next to the edge. That's genius. It's brilliant. It keeps the edge very close to your finger, but it's safe and it's extremely comfortable, rather than having a, you know, half-done choil like this. So I'm not a huge fan of what they did with that, and it also just sort of makes the blade look a little bit awkward. Now I'm going to talk about the steel a little bit. 154 cm, I think I've talked about it a good deal in some of my other reviews. To my understanding, chemically, the composition of it, it's basically just glorified 440. And what I mean by that is, it's 440 with more carbides and basically a purer alloy. So less sulfur, less phosphorus. It's not quite as polluted. It's basically just beefed up 440. Which isn't a terrible steel, but it's by no means a super steel. People talk about it like it's premium steel sometimes. It's just, no, it's not. In my experience, 154 cm just absolutely does not compare to, you know, the higher end stuff like M390, or even for that matter like N680 or S30V or VG10 or any of those. It just doesn't compare. 154 cm in my mind is sort of on the same level as 1095. So that's where that's at. It's a great steel considering the price of this knife. Recently one of these went up on Blade HQ, a vintage 905 Stryker, for just over $100, so it's a decent steel for the price. At least they're not charging you, you know, $150 or $200 for a 154 cm blade. Cough, cough, the Norseman. Anyway, but the great benefit of 154 cm is that it is definitely stainless. And what I love about this knife in particular is that it doesn't have a coating. So it makes a great beater knife because you can use it, and you can see the scratches on here, because you can use it hard and you don't have to worry about it looking really bad. Even the toughest coatings, after a while, they do start to look bad. You know, they get these marks on them, and they start to wear down, and after a couple years of use, it just looks really bad. I've had this knife far longer than the last one you just saw, and it still looks, you know, brand new in comparison because it doesn't have a coating to wear off. So I'm very glad that they went with a bare steel blade on this. It for sure adds value in my mind. Now also, I want to point out something in the metallurgy. You'll notice there's a little spot right here. That is oxidation, believe it or not. Yes, even stainless steels can rust. A lot of people think stainless steel, like the classification of that is sort of, you know, a solid distinction. It's really not. It's very much a gradual, like a gradient from stainless to non-stainless. Typically the number is 11% free chromium, 12% chromium content for a knife to be stainless. Now this is definitely considered stainless, but even 154 cm can get spots of rust. And so that's why some stainless steels are far more stainless than other stainless steels. They're just done right. Now, I'm going to go over the handle a bit. This is sort of a handle that's near and dear to my heart because I've had a lot of knives that have had this handle, and this is sort of the grandfather to the modern Stryker and triage handles. Now you'll notice some of the differences. This is the same handle that the modern Stryker has. You'll notice some of the differences here. I'll just set these down. Some of the differences include they added a thumb ramp up here, which definitely helps with jimping. The jimping over here is quite generous. It's very grippy, but there's not a whole lot of physical rise for that thumb ramp. There's not a whole lot. It is much more generous over here, especially as a hand stoppage. It works great. So I love that they added that, and it helps to balance it out in ratio. What they kept was this wonderful finger choil that comes down into the primary choil. And one thing they've done up here, you'll notice, I'll focus this for you, one of the great things they've done is they shortened the gap between your finger and the edge right here. So there's a big long flat plane right there, whereas on the new one it's much shorter. And I think that was an absolutely brilliant move, because this huge elongated plane there really isn't all that necessary. You've got the same stoppage, you just don't need to have all that mass up there. So shortening that down was definitely a great move for the new handle. You'll notice one of the other things that they changed was down here they added sort of a pronounced, I don't want to call it a choil, but an indentation. You've got a nice pinky wrap right there, or if you have, a little bit larger hands than I. But it's definitely a great addition because it does add a bit more jimping down there. The other difference is really just that they extended the roundness of the butt of the handle just to be a little bit more ergonomic. But nonetheless, even the vintage handle, it's a great design. It's a really versatile platform. This handle can go with so many different blades, and it doesn't feel awkward in design. Now, one of the other things I wanted to mention was, believe it or not, even though this is a liner lock, it is a titanium liner lock. Now, I thought this was sort of a myth at first, but it's true. These are titanium liners. I sort of assumed, like every other knife, that they were 420J. That's sort of the standard steel for liners. But this really enhances the knife in my eyes. Titanium liner locks and tie frame locks are really when you get into some of the much higher quality knives. A lot of customs are tie frame locks. And I can tell that it has definitely improved the performance of the lock. Not just in its strength, but in its accuracy, because over all these years that this knife has been hard used, there is absolutely no play. There's less play in this knife right now than some of my newer Benchmades. So that was a wonderful move, I think. However, definitely a very late lockup. It was almost 100% right there. So it is quite a good amount of displacement there. Now, I usually don't like liner locks a whole lot, because if you're going to have a lock where you have to put your finger in front of the blade while it is disengaged, then you might as well go all out and make it a frame lock. So I've never really been a huge fan of liner locks, but this one is very beefy, it's titanium, and it's very accurate and was done well. So definitely props there. The last thing I'm going to cover is the clip. This is sort of how I recognized this knife from my customer at first when I saw it. Not by the label, but by the clip. It's a very distinct Benchmade clip design. It's very well known. And I sort of want to give you guys a little bit of a comparison between this old clip and the newer Benchmade clip. You'll notice some similarities. They both have sort of a very small taper when it comes down to this point. So it's wider up here than it is down here. The biggest difference really, not paying attention to the fact that this is deep carry, the biggest difference really is that this is slimmed down. This is just broader in general. And I think that was a good move. I don't think having a giant, broad clip is all that important. As long as it has the retention it needs, I would definitely prefer to have a slimmer clip. Now this one you can tell has sort of been worn down over the years. If you look real close right here, you can see there's a gap right there between the G10 and the clip. So you can tell the spring tension on the clip has been worn down over years of use, and the G10 itself is not nearly as grippy anymore. It's smoothed out. So this will show signs of wear, but granted, this knife wears really well. If you're looking for a knife that is, you know, a small, nimble, easy to carry, versatile EDC that can be used for utility or self-defense if ever need be, this is a wonderful way to go. If you're looking for a tactical folder, this will do it. If you're looking for something that is, you know, a very fine showpiece, maybe not quite. This is my review of a nice vintage Benchmade 905 Stryker, $100 back in the day. Thanks guys for listening. This is Ice. Please comment, rate, and subscribe.